Hi there. I'm speaking to you as a committed citizen. Faced with a dangerous situation, your brain is designed to react instinctively. But to do that, you need to be aware of the danger. And you also need to get to know him early on. Otherwise, your instincts won't save you. When it comes to plastics, you may be one of those who are still blinded by their ease, lightness, color, and price. But as these plastics enter your life, they exacerbate the insidious pollution that hides a danger. Wherever you are, whoever you are, you're involved. Like everyone else, your health is threatened by this pollution, which is irreversibly infiltrating every organ in your body. A priori, no one is yet ill from plastics, and no one has already died from them. And so much the better. But for how much longer? A few decades? A few centuries? Even more? I've no idea. Nobody knows, but the absence of data does not mean the absence of harm. This is why I launch an appeal to reason, of which here are my 3 arguments. Hop! Before going any further, if you want to help me fight this pollution, subscribe to the channel now. Give this video a thumbs up. And find me on the social networks to discuss it. First argument. The growing, irreversible, out-of-control contamination of all your vital resources. The OECD is an intergovernmental organization for economic studies. One of the reports states that plastics production in 2019 is estimated to have been over 400 million tons. And the stock of plastics in the global economy is already estimated at over 3,000 million tons. At the same time, in just 1 year, 353 million tons of waste were added to the total already produced. A quarter of them gave off toxic smoke and ash when incinerated. Less than a fifth were collected, sorted, and in some cases reprocessed for reuse. This is what is most often called recycling. But in the strict sense of the term, it is generally a matter of downcycling. And that's a disaster. My first video will give you more details. Finally, the vast majority of this waste is now in the environment. Whether in so-called controlled landfill sites, or anywhere else on Earth, or in aquatic environments. As plastics are not biodegradable, they pollute the environment, and they may pollute it forever. On top of that, plastic objects generate pollution as soon as they are manufactured. This pollution is prolonged during their use and their aging in your home. Or in the wild. As you can see here, microplastics from recycling plants are also missing. The raw water leaving these plants is said to contain tens of millions of microplastics per cubic meter of water. And these particles will end up in nature sooner or later. And certainly in our organs. Lastly, microplastics from plastics trapped in landfill soil do not appear in this figure. But as you'll recall, each object fragments into tiny particles that become invisible to the naked eye. These particles are uncontrollable and irreversibly contaminate our vital resources: air, water, and food. This contamination is also global, as the particles circulate with atmospheric currents. They also circulate via ocean currents. And they are returned to the atmosphere with the sea spray. No terrestrial or aquatic ecosystem in the world is spared. In recent years, more effective measurement techniques have been developed. They are constantly being improved, enabling scientists to identify and locate these particles more easily. The number of articles on microplastics has increased from less than 100 to more than 4,200 in 10 years. This scenario seems to be repeating itself with nanoplastics. The facts are simple. Wherever scientists look for plastic particles, they find them. These are obviously fragments of the objects that our grandparents, our parents, or ourselves have bought, have used or are still using, have worn out or are still worning out, or have already thrown away. The more plastic we produce, the more we increase the global stock of particles that are invisible to the naked eye and out of control. But be careful, for 70 years, annual production has increased every year. And the annual increase itself is still higher than in previous years. You can see that this curve is becoming more and more vertical. Annual global plastic production is accelerating. So every year, humanity produces more and more plastic. And these plastics are producing more and more particles without humanity having the slightest control over them. And without you noticing. In one of the OECD studies, you can read that if we do not radically change our use of plastics, current trends in population growth and rising incomes will lead to a 70% increase in the annual production of plastics and waste in 2040 compared with 2020. Another OECD report on scenarios for action to 2060 states that plastic consumption is expected to increase from 460 million tonnes to 1251 million tonnes between 2019 and 2060. This is what awaits us if we do nothing. And every country has its share of responsibility for this future. However, growth rates will vary greatly between regions. Plastic consumption expected to double in OECD countries. But emerging economies are likely to see much larger increases. It's madness because these plastics will always accumulate. If we do not react, microplastics generated by their fragmentation will double before the year 2060. And this quantity will increase again and again, as we have already seen that this fragmentation will last for several centuries. Second argument, the irreversible contamination of every organ in your body. Particles present in nature, and therefore in your environment, can end in your body. They can enter through your lungs, through your digestive system, and sometimes through your skin with cosmetic products. These figures from a recent study speak of 14 particles per gram found in human lungs. Just under 10 particles per gram found in small intestine. Around 8 particles per gram found in large intestines. And finally, around 6 particles per gram were found in tonsils. These analyses only covered particle sizes between 0.02 and 0.1 mm. The smallest or largest, if any, cannot therefore be detected. Once in your digestive tract or lungs, the particles can pass into your bloodstream following the same path as water, oxygen, nutrients or medicines. In 2023, for the first time, human heart samples from 15 patients who had undergone heart surgery were studied. Researchers found microplastics. As the blood transfers the elements needed for your organs to function, plastic particles take advantage of this to sneak in. They pass through the natural barriers that are supposed to protect your organs. And we'll be able to find them everywhere. This latest synthesis shows that particles can reach all your vital organs. At the moment, I can't see any way of removing particles that have entered an organ. This contamination can therefore reasonably be described as irreversible. So the more you breathe, drink or eat, the more your organs become loaded with particles. Some of it comes out, of course, in your feces or urine. But there's no guarantee that your organs will be able to limit this contamination. And nothing tells you otherwise either. There's no certainty that your organs will fill completely with particles. But let's be careful. Lack of knowledge demands vigilance on our part, and let's see why. If you go back to well before the invention of plastics, nobody was exposed. Then, global production began to generate objects. During their manufacture, use, wear and tear, and storage in landfill or elsewhere, the fragmentation process may have begun. And so the first plastic particles began to contaminate nature, and therefore vital resources and, very probably, people living nearby. Today, it is difficult to know when the contamination of human organs really began. If this green area represents the quantity of plastic produced up to 1980, this area can be an estimate of the quantity of particles produced in the environment in 1980. If we disregard incinerated plastics, this surface area can represent the quantity of plastics to which a person living in 1980 was exposed. Let's call it an exposure rate. 40 years later, around 2020, we know very well that the entire globe is affected and very probably the entire world population. Every study involving food, drink, air, or human organs proves that this pollution is a global pandemic. The yellow area under the curve is therefore an estimate of the exposure rate to which humanity was exposed in 2020. Obviously, this rate of exposure varies according to region and lifestyle. But overall, this rate was 10 times higher than in 1980. Worse still, if we do nothing, the estimated contamination rate in 2060 will be more than 55 times higher than the rate in 1980. I leave it to you to imagine what the rate of exposure to particles will be for future generations if we do nothing to drastically limit the production of plastics. Now for my third argument: irreversible impacts on your health. The rate of exposure worsens every year. But we don't know what diseases could develop as a result of this contamination. And above all, are you going to fall ill? Tomorrow, next year, 10 years from now, or never? We don't know that. On the other hand, there are potential impacts of micro and nanoplastics on various organ systems in humans. These words are the title of this recent review article. Let's take a look at a few elements. The reproductive system. Information about humans is still limited. This article mentions well-known studies on placentas and meconium. The researchers also point out that plastics can penetrate testicular cells and have an impact on microstructures, sperm proliferation and survival, and have an impact on testicular growth. In this article, you can also read terms like reproductive toxicity, testicular and ovarian damage, hormonal changes, reproductive problems, reduced pregnancy rate, and number of embryos. In your lungs, the authors remind you that inhaling plastics can affect your respiratory health. The mechanisms involved have evocative names such as oxidative stress, inflammatory reactions, destruction of the epithelial barrier, cell death, tissue damage, and respiratory diseases. In your intestines, the authors explain that exposure to plastics can cause inflammation or disruption of the microbiota that is essential for your metabolism, immune defenses, and susceptibility to disease. In your central nervous system, exposure to plastics can cause cell damage and increase vulnerability to neuronal disorders. More specifically, exposure to plastics can affect the central nervous system by influencing two biochemical molecules, gamma-aminobutyric acid and glutamate. But the metabolisms of these two molecules are intimately linked. An imbalance between the two can lead to major health problems. Gamma-aminobutyric acid is a central nervous system inhibitor, while glutamate is the most important excitatory neurotransmitter. The functional stability of our brain is therefore the result of a balance between these two neurotransmitters. They are important for the rate at which our brains work, for speech, for learning, and for short and long-term memory. If gamma-aminobutyric acid is optimal, you'll respond appropriately to everyday challenges. If it's low, you may feel nervous, irritable, and hungry, for example. Finally, cell death by apoptosis is a recurrent theme in this review. You'll find more details in my previous video. So, More and more evidence suggests that plastics can have harmful effects on your health, but the underlying mechanisms are still unclear. The article concludes that observation-based studies on humans are needed. Researchers are therefore waiting to be able to observe organs that have been damaged by plastics before they can understand. They have no choice, but what will they find? Benign, disabling, or fatal illnesses? From my point of view, if we wait for the first patients for understanding and acting accordingly, it may be too late. This is why I appeal to reason, so that you don't do the irreparable. Humanity seems to be heading unconsciously towards a global crisis with potentially irreparable consequences. In fact, when contaminating your body with plastics will officially become dangerous. When you will get sick from plastics. Or when some of us will die because of plastics. How will you protect yourself? Your vital resources are already all contaminated. They are probably even contaminated a little more every day. And this contamination is totally out of control. It's vital that we do everything we can to protect our vital resources. For us and for future generations. We must be vigilant and avoid irreparable damage. To achieve this, we urgently need to radically change our model of society. We can no longer afford to consume too much packaging and plastic objects. That's why I appeal to every citizen of the world to become aware of the invisible dangers of plastic pollution. And I appeal to you to share this knowledge widely. There is an urgent need for this knowledge to be heard by health professionals, petrochemical industrialists, plastic sellers, friendly influencers, researchers, teachers, journalists, eco-philosophers, or political decision-makers. These people have the power and the responsibility to help reduce the risk of the irreparable happening. And they won't really do that until they know the dangers they themselves are facing. And these dangers also threaten their family, friends, and colleagues. Wherever you are, whatever your socio-economic situation, whoever you are constantly exposed to plastic pollution from air, water, and everything you eat. There is still no miracle solution for limiting this exposure. On the other hand, our exposure is proportional to the existing stock of plastic. I'm talking about plastic waste, but also about the plastics we use and wear. And this stock of plastic is directly dependent on global production. To avoid irreparable damage, we urgently need to reduce this production. But by how much? A quarter? A third? A half? 2/3? 3/4? All of it? Nobody really knows. But shouldn't we be vigilant? I therefore appeal to you, like all citizens of the world, to use your purchasing power. You have the power to give up all non-essential plastic objects immediately. It's easy to do without many of them. You'll find more details in my previous video. What's more, to reduce production, many of us need to take action. With this appeal, I invite you to spread the word. I invite you to spread the word about the dangers of this pollution, to disseminate all the knowledge you possess. I know it's not a funny subject, nor is it easy to talk about without breaking the mood. But we don't really have a choice. It's essential that knowledge circulates once and for all, and as widely as possible, on all the social networks you frequent. The easiest way is to share this video. If we don't all do something soon, when it's too late to turn back, you might be able to filter your air. Maybe you can filter your water. But how will you filter your food? How can you decontaminate fruit, vegetables, and animal products without removing the fiber, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins they provide? At the moment, I don't really see how we can do that. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Because we're not ostriches, reason will open your eyes. Because we're not ostriches,